I'm Tom Osman, and this is Whatever Comes Next, the podcast where I explore the world of underground and independent music making. And on today's episode, I am very excited to be joined by the great Todd Rittmann of US Maple and Dead Rider, but also, as well as being multi-instrumentalist, recording engineer and producer for a variety of different projects. And in fact, there are a number of key releases that Todd Rittmann has been involved in that I am going to highlight in this introduction and link into the description. But the main topic that we are discussing in this interview today is the first album by US Maple, Long Hair in Three Stages, which has just recently been reissued on vinyl by the great SKiN GRAFT Records. And this was a really exciting episode for me to do, and I feel like it's an opportunity for me to thank a lot of people. One of the things that I really appreciate from having done this podcast is the way that it has given me these different connections to great people in the music world, people who are very much in the world that I'm interested in exploring. And in a way, getting to do this episode with Todd kind of feels like it has a story that goes back a number of episodes back in the podcast. In a way, I mean, there's always kind of like a step further back that you can go looking for origins, but I think a key reference point getting to this point here is the interview that I did with Tommy Meehan of Squid Pisser, for which I have great thanks to Dan at Discipline PR. And from talking with Tommy, which was a really kind of inspiring conversation for me, I had the opportunity to talk to Gregory Jacobson of Lovely Little Girls. And through that connection, I suppose that was where I started to have my link with Todd. And kind of running parallel to all of this was with my my work on the Every Album Ever with Mike and Alex podcast, because when they covered Dazzling Killman, that gave me the opportunity through Jared, thank you very much, Jared, to talk with Nick Sakes of Dazzling Killman and Upright Forms and various other projects, which I was very happy to be able to do. And then also to connect with Mark at SKiN GRAFT Records. And Mark has been incredibly generous whenever there has been anything to that I'm covering that's been a part of SKiN GRAFT Records. Very, very generous and helpful in terms of, you know, sourcing different releases and getting me in contact with different people. So all of these aspects led and coalesced up to this point of getting to talk to Todd. And I'd wanted to talk to Todd for a while. And so I was very happy that this opportunity came up where we had this reissue of Long Hair in Three Stages to promote. So, having briefly mentioned before some of the other credits of Todd, so he helpfully highlighted a few particular releases worth mentioning that he's been involved with in one way or another. So, for example, there is a forthcoming LP by Cult Canyon, which Todd recorded and produced, and I'm going to link the single from that release. There is also a new EP by Collections of Colonies of Bees, which has just come out, which he played a part in. He would also like to mention the Effusive Supreme record by Lovely Little Girls, which I'm a big fan of, which he mastered. I hope I'm getting that right. I think he mastered that record. And someone else that fits into this story, Charlie Verber, who was the drummer for Lovely Little Girls on their first album, Cleaning the Filth from a Delicate Frame, and on Effusive Supreme. There is a record that he was involved in, which, again, Todd Rittmann had a hand in, which was a project called Chiromancer, and the album is Guilty Pleasure. And in fact, even though I don't generally give spoilers for the podcast, I have now done an interview with Charlie for the new record he has under his own name, Crater, and that is going to come out next week. So, more interconnections in this same weird and wonderful world, and a few other releases to mention relating to Todd, Casino Wilderness Period by Sasha Mullen, on which Todd played drums, bass, and guitar, as well as producing and recording the record. And as well as that, The Wit of the Stair by Evelyn Davis, and One More Story Told by Dan Wattaker. And on top of all of that, I'm going to put a link to a track by Cheer Accident featuring Nils Frykdal of Sleepytime Gorilla Museum. And I'm also going to put a link to a track by Ralph Soul Jackson featuring Chicago soul legend Nellie Tiger Travis. So, a smorgasbord of different releases that Todd has been involved with. We focused on US Maple, their early years, around about the time of their first album. And I think it'll be a great insight for people who are interested in the band, because I feel like there aren't that many interviews out there with members of US Maple talking about their history. But yeah, there is obviously so much to be covered with Todd, and I do hope that I get the opportunity to talk to him again in the future when he has something else to promote. So that's a lot of preamble, but there it is. You can follow me at Tom Osmond Sounds. My website, tomosmondsounds.com, has music and writings about music that I make. And I will put links for the reissue of Long Hair in Three Stages into the description, and the links where you can follow Todd as well. And needless to say, as should be clear from the list of releases that I gave just before, he has a lot of different projects that he is involved with. So no doubt there are going to be more coming soon. I think there is even the possibility that some more Dead Rider material may be on the horizon, which is also very cool. I am going to play a track from Long Hair in Three Stages at the end of the episode. You're about to hear a little clip just now. Without further ado, Todd Rittmann, take it away.
All right. Thomas?
To be honest, yes.
Hey.
Todd, pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
I feel like you have a much better eye for the aesthetics. The background that you have is very nicely arranged. I think mine's too busy.
Well, thank you. I thought about it for just a minute.
Apparently a minute was enough.
I didn't like all the stuff in the background, and I like things to be a little asymmetrical.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I like the angles.
The centered composition that's always in these things. That's just rubs me the wrong way. I feel like it's a debriefing, or I don't know. I'm giving a deposition or something.
Do you think that this kind of attitude finds its way into your music? Because I guess there's an angular element to what you do musically.
Yeah, probably. That's probably just in me. Yeah.
And excuse my ignorance of American geography, but you are in Chicago.
Yes, sir.
And are you born and bred in Chicago?
I grew up in a town outside of Chicago, but I've lived in Chicago since 1987, with a brief departure to DeKalb, where I went to school and met the other guys from US Maple.
Yeah. So talking about kind of like just before the origins of US Maple, so you're in the Mercury Players with Pat Samson, who also went on into US Maple. So what, like when I think of Chicago, it has, this rich history with various different underground music. What was it like for you in the early 90s when you were in that band, and the kind of music that was around you and, your peers, so to speak?
Well, let's see. There was kind of a bunch of people moving from DeKalb, which is, I want to say, like 50 miles due west of Chicago. And unless you're attending the university there, the town doesn't have a lot of possibilities. So most people finish school, they might hang out for a year or something after, or they might, if they're not going right into the workforce, which I didn't, um, will, move to the city and see what's going on. The arty types in my little clique all kind of arrived in Chicago, I want to say between 91, 92, and 93. And yeah, Chicago was a very fertile ground for making art and music in that you could find cheap rent in sketchy neighborhoods and find enough work that if you had a couple of roommates, you could pretty much work part-time and get by, and the rest of your time could be devoted to uh, creative pursuits. That doesn't seem to be the case any longer, though. As
Yeah.
days are gone.
So what was kind of your introduction to the more avant-garde side of rock music?
Hmm. I guess like in growing up, I was listening to the classic rock, Led Zeppelin, AC/DC, Black Sabbath kind of stuff. And then late in high school, um, punk rock. This would have been like mid 80s. Punk rock kind of cracked my consciousness. And that was that it was a time when in high school you could go to clubs that were not all ages, but no one was checking these, little dive bars and even some bigger theaters. Just it was a little looser of a thing with that world of culture. It was like no one was checking on it. So you could go to 21 and over shows and be served. No one's checking IDs. Um, and that was a big eye opener, but that was really like the sort of second wave of 80s punk was more of a gateway drug to things like Butthole Surfers and Einstürzende Neubauten. And so like once I found stuff like that was like Swans and Sonic Youth and Pussy Galore, just the floodgates kind of open for me of like, I found a thing that kind of rhymes with it's got the punk ethos, but it's a little bit more adventurous artistically. And at the same time, I was kind of like developing interest in other kinds of music too, just like R&B and blues music.
Yeah, I feel like some of that does come out in Dead Rider, for
Yeah.
example. Like there's kind of like a funk. Like I don't know if I read this somewhere else, but I was talking with I don't know if you know Dunn with Lords and Lady Kevin. It's basically Trevor Dunn, Kevin Ritmanis, and Gina Squats together. I don't know if you've worked with any of them at any point. Maybe
No,
not.
but that sounds like something I'd like to hear.
I think you would. They play like it's they sort of refer to themselves like gospel blues, I think, but it's so sort of abstracted. And I brought up Dead Rider with them and I said, well, I feel like there's sort of a comparison that to me, Dead Rider is kind of like deconstructed funk. I mean, I don't know if that really fits with all of it, but there's like you've got this funk element, but a lot of the time when I think of funk, I think of something that's like quite a fixed style of a particular time, whereas what you do with it seems to be taking elements of it and you represent it in this very unique kind of way. And I guess I don't know, maybe it just kind of follows through with what you were doing with US Maple as well, not in the funk sense, but just that you're taking elements that are kind of traditional and you're doing something quite unusual with them.
Yeah, that's fair. Still, Dead Rider's mission is to kind of stick with the program, but lean more into a little bit more of a danceable groove and play around with how far we can stretch taffy till it falls apart.
Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. So, in terms of US Maple, when the band came together, so you mentioned that you knew all of the members before. You knew Mark Shippy and you knew Al Johnson before you came to Chicago, is that right?
Yeah, they were in a band called Shorty, and before that it was called Snail Boy. And yeah, we were playing the same church basement shows and um, going to nearby towns to play places like O'Kay's Corral in Madison, Wisconsin, and little VFW halls here and there.
And I think Shorty were already connected with SKiN GRAFT Records, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, you are not
So,
wrong.
so was that when US Maple formed, was that your first time working with Mark and with SKiN GRAFT Records?
Yes. Yeah.
So what was the story behind how your two respective bands split up and US Maple started?
Um, I think Shorty sort of their bass player Luke. I'm kind of secondhand on all this information, but I think Luke wanted to bow out of it, and they tried bringing a new bassist in who did his level best to fit in, but Al had kind of whispered in my ear that the band was maybe going to fizzle out. Shorty was going to, and that he was looking to start another band. And yeah, a couple of years later, it was like, okay, it's go time. Let's do this.
And did his like because I've listened to some Shorty and I feel like his vocal style was different at that point. So when you started US Maple, did he have kind of fixed in his mind this style he wanted to have? Because it's a very memorable idiosyncratic style that he has.
Well, I'll tell you, Thomas, there was kind of a long lead up to a first recording session. And we did a lot of work sort of putting together this AC/DC cover for the SKiN GRAFT compilation and coming up with two originals for a single that we were gonna. All right, that's a cat. Where was I?
The first recording and
The first recording, and yeah, so we were sort of pulling together material to do a single of original stuff, and we came up with the music, but we didn't actually get to hear what Al was going to sound like until we were in the recording studio. And I, speaking for myself, I was utterly surprised and confused. Um, and it was a really important experience because it was kind of the first time, the music was also a big departure from what Shorty or Mercury players were doing. And I remember walking out of the studio. We were recording at Easley Studios in Memphis, and it was a great recording session, and just had a really great time there. But I remember listening to what we had, just wondering, like, is anyone gonna like this? Like, is this any good? Like, up until then, any kind of recordings I'd been involved in, it was like kind of just knew what it was supposed to sound like. And here we are making something that sounds challenging, even to people who made it. Like, what even is this? And I don't know. I found that sensation to be really exciting. Like,
yeah.
this is kind of cool. Like, I just made something and put a lot of work into it, and all these guys we really worked hard to do something that was fresh. And well, yeah, I guess we did, because it didn't sound like anything I'd ever heard before.
Yeah, like to that point,
And
I was
Al's vocal delivery was just like, is that really what he's gonna do? Sounds good,
absolutely.
Al. You know,
But even like, to the music in general, like I was thinking about that, the cover that you did, because that's Sin City you're talking about, right? The AC/DC cover.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I think with AC/DC, they've got such a distinctive sound, and that rhythm section is so powerful in the way they play that it's really impressive to me that that version that you do is like it's so kind of kicked off kilter in a way that has its own rhythm that's quite different. So like to me, I kind of think if I wanted to go about covering AC/DC, it'd be very hard to get away from that kind of rhythmic core. So
Yeah. Well, that's Pat Samson. He is an artiste on the drums and took that role of lead drums very seriously. Like a lot of times he was really holding the conductor's baton, and the choices he made were really affecting what the overall feel of the music is like.
yeah, no, that does
It
make a
wasn't
lot of
just
sense.
like keeping time or laying down a backbeat. He's taking your expectations and playing a slow waltz over it.
And so you formed US Maple in 95, if I've got that right at the beginning.
I'll take your word for it. It's a
Because it,
lifetime ago.
fair enough. Because it seems to be like going through the timeline of what you did. So you had that first recording, and then you recorded Long Hair in 3 stages. You had this, the album came out, you had this tour of Europe that you did, you recorded a Peel session. It seems like all of that happened very quickly, like within about the first year or so of the band forming. Does that feel that it moved that quickly?
Uh, it, yeah, it sounds more more condensed than it felt, I would say.
Hmm.
I think when you're 25 and you're just, this is like you've already been in a million bands and you're just trying to get your hand on the next rung of the ladder. Man, it seems like it takes forever.
Hmm.
But yeah, that was really a cool, quick progression. And a lot of that was Al and Mark had already kind of made some connections and already done a European tour with Shorty, and so that sort of path had already been cleared in some ways for us.
That does make a lot of sense because I was going to ask you like how you managed to, jet off straight into Europe so quickly. So
Yeah.
you mentioned about how when you did that first recording session, it was the first time where you thought, I'm actually not sure if this is any good or not. Um, what was the kind of reception to Long Hair in 3 stages right at the beginning when it came out? Because I was also wondering, like, in terms of when you went to Europe, like, did people know what to expect? Had a lot of people heard the record at that point?
I don't know what the audiences were there to expect. I do know that for sort of like our scene of mutual friends, there was a sense of like, we thought this was just going to be more straight ahead rock, and this has got some other dynamics and textures and rhythms and a lot of rug pulling going on that is like, what, why are you doing this? But that was really, I just felt that was interesting and like more evidence that we were on the right track. Um, as far as audiences in Europe, they're kind of the same as here. It took a long time for people to sort of click into what we were doing. Like they didn't, even if they didn't dig it though, they were there for it because they you could tell we were totally committed to it. It wasn't some kind of just making up bullshit as we go along. This is hyper composed music that has improvisational sections, and the performance of it is not just a rendering of it. It's not just a reenactment. It's its own thing. Um, and I think that comes across even if you're the typical part of your brain that enjoys music where there's expectations being met is just left out in the rain, like couldn't care less. There's still everything else there is so complete that people would stick around for the shows. They tell their friends, they come back, and gradually it seemed like people were familiar with the music enough to sort of be a little more integrated into it as we were doing it, if that
Do you,
makes sense.
yeah. Do you think that there was an element at that time that you were in part actively trying to challenge the audiences, or it was more that you wanted to do something that was interesting for yourselves?
Yeah, no, it's definitely 100% us just trying to crack ourselves up and blow our own minds. Like we wanted to do the thing. We wanted to create that experience for ourselves of like uh hearing Perubu for the first time,
Yeah.
or um or seeing 2001 for the first time. It just is that oh, I don't know what's happening here. I'm not this is an alien world. And yeah, we were just dedicated to creating that for ourselves, just in the practice space and then in the studio and then live.
Yeah.
At some point, especially during the shows, an antagonistic sort of uh, element could come up. A lot of audiences were hostile, and that then it's like, well, we don't care if you like this or not, so this is going to be fun.
Yeah.
But that was never the goal, of
Yeah.
course.
And so because we are in large part here talking about the reissue of Long Hair in Three Stages, I wanted to ask you a bit more kind of specifics about the album. What do you, because you've obviously had a bunch of different projects that you've worked on, whether you've been playing or whether you've been recording. What do you remember about the process of actually making the album?
Long hair.
Yeah.
Um, Long Hair was recorded in my hometown of Hoffman Estates, Illinois, at a studio called Solid Sound. I think it's still there. Last time I checked, it was. Um, I forget whose idea it was. Jim O'Rourke was already kind of in the skin graft camp, and I forget whose idea it was to ask him to record. But I was really excited about that. I was a big Gaster Del Sol fan, and the assistant engineer, Phil Bonet, I had actually recorded my very first demo at that studio with in high school. So that was kind of cool to be back, and just see if he remembered anything about this thing that happened 10 years earlier. And he did remember that. So that was kind of cool. I was kind of familiar with the studio and the setup and the personnel. But those were records that were made in with a super limited budget. Everything you hear has been rehearsed, and there's very little figuring things out or fleshing out mixes. The stuff that's just happens all the time now with unlimited tracks and unlimited time and studios in people's houses. It's like we had 6 days to make that. So there's a day of setting up. Maybe you get one track in at the end of that day. Then the next 2 days are laying down basic tracks for everything, which the basic tracks become 95% of, the musical element of what you're hearing. Sorry, not musical, but the instrumental element of what you're hearing. And then we do vocals for another 2 days and then mix the whole thing in a day and a half, maybe 2 days. Those were 12-hour days of just nonstop going after it. It was fun.
And how actively were you all involved in the mixing part of the process?
That back in those days, all four of us were just going to be in the control room or in the live room the whole time. Um, the Jim and Phil are left to do their thing when it comes to getting things mixed, and then we'd all have a say in what the final product is like and some fine tuning. But it the recordings of our early records really are just kind of capturing what we would be doing, what we did live,
Mm.
the exception of that vocals are recorded after the instrumental tracks.
So had you already played all of those songs on stage before you recorded the
No,
album?
no. It was always really rare for US Maple to play any material in front of an audience before we recorded it. And it just took us forever to write the material. And maybe the one exception is Long Hair, where we did have maybe some shows with some of that material in there. I can't really remember, but typically we're just recording an album and then we're a band playing the album.
Mm.
Typically we're writing and rehearsing parts up into the minute we go in the studio, sometimes after. And sometimes it, like playing them live is reverse engineering something you pretty much came up with a couple days before you left for the studio.
And when you say reverse engineering, what do you mean in that
Well,
context?
a lot of the songs are based on little events that happen. Like the changes in the songs aren't necessarily counting bars or beats. It's when the drummer does this particular thing, we'll go into the next movement, or visual cues, or some other methods of arranging the music other than meter.
So from that point of view, like based on like the feel that you had in a performance, would you potentially like you'd play around like let's say for example if a change is going to be on something from the drummer, he can basically decide when he wants that to be and then you're going to come in at that moment?
Not just decide, basically hold the entire operation hostage if he wants. And that would go into more and more absurd territory when we did it live, where it really is like if it's Pat's opportunity to cue the change, well, he might just hold time and space in his back pocket and make everybody wonder what's happening.
So was that kind of like was there a culture of pranking each other in the band?
It never got into pranking per se, but it would be sort of pushing moments in something that was like the old Jerry Lewis movies where you're wondering if this is it. What's happened? Did someone have just
Yeah.
you're left to wonder for a moment and then you're given back your tricycle to ride. That's a terrible analogy.
A couple of like questions about more sort of like about the sound in general of the band. I was wondering, I think somewhere in the like in the SKiN GRAFT page about US Maple, it brings up Captain Beefheart, and I feel like that's sort of a reference point that I hear in the music, and I was like in that sort of sense of the appearance of chaos on the surface that's actually very controlled. Was that something that was kind of an aspect of US Maple? Like I think you talked about how it might come across as chaotic, but it was actually extremely well rehearsed. So was Captain Beefheart kind of a through line for you, or is that just sort of after the fact that people make that connection?
Well, of course, we've all talked about this for 25 years now, but Captain Beefheart was not really a touchstone for us. That came up in interviews. I know that like we'd all heard Trout Mask Replica. I didn't own a copy. I had a roommate that owned a copy of it. And so when that became a reference in reviews of our music and performances, of course, we educated ourselves. And I remember Phil Bonet brought in he had a collection of pirated videos of the Magic Band playing on TV in Denmark or something. There's now everything's on YouTube, but back then it was like, what is this amazing artifact you've brought to the recording session? So we were watching that, and I think it was after Acre Thrills I finally heard dock at the dock at the radar station. And I remember listening to a side of it and going, "Oh, we really are ripping those guys off." But yeah, it really wasn't an intentional sort of reference point for us. Far from it.
Yeah.
I don't
It ki-
mind it though. And that kind of thing has happened a few times to me where like there's references to other artists and I'm like, "Oh, I should check Scott Walker out, you know. Oh
yeah.
wow, I like this. I'm gonna bite this."
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess a lot of the time there can be a certain kind of affinity with a way of doing things. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's actually been an exact connection with it, but it's like an approach.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Kind of like on the other end of the spectrum, I was thinking, you've got the reference to ZZ Top in the first album. And then also as well, I feel like in I think it's in the last track in Lady to Bing, there's some wailing guitars that I think this sounds like a bit of a nod to Led Zeppelin. And you brought
Oh,
up, kind of your exposure to those classic rock bands before. I was wondering at that stage with the band and just like generally in the lifetime of the band, what was your kind of relationship or your feeling towards kind of classic rock?
if there's anything that we were referencing while we were writing, it's the whole encyclopedia of classic rock. And that's the stuff we all grew up on. You know, Pat might have listened to Fusion or something. I don't know. You know, we were all there growing up with the classic rock uh 60s and 70s hits in our collections. And I feel like I can even see it in the way Al moves. Like he's got classic rock frontman energy to the nth degree. And it's just in us, you know, it's just I don't know, if you grew up playing baseball, there's a lot of things that look like baseball or feel like baseball. It's some sort of reference point. Yeah, to us it's like Judas Priest and Van Halen.
Yeah, incidentally, David Lee Roth is like one of the people on my wish list that I want to talk to at the end of the probably difficult to get to spectrum. But
Might be surprised. That man loves to talk.
well, I was going to say, I feel like an interview with David Lee Roth is basically that you have him talk at you and tell you stories, which would be super cool, but
Yeah.
not necessarily a two-way conversation. This might also be another after the fact reference point, but I wonder whether there was a King Crimson aspect to your music.
I'm just now becoming a King Crimson fan.
Yeah, interesting.
They're pretty good.
Not bad. Yeah.
King Crimson was one of those bands that like you know, I was fully into Scratch Acid, and then Ray from Mercury Players was like, maybe you should check out the Birthday Party. And then it was like, oh wow, okay, cool. And then, you know, I would be playing Birthday Party for Tim Jones from Cheer Accident, and he'd be like, yeah, King Crimson. That just snaky, jazzy bass line thing with the hard-hitting drums, just impossible grooves. They they really blazed a trail that is kind of undeniable.
Yeah,
Cast a long shadow.
definitely.
So I guess I gotta admit that King Crimson got in there somehow,
Yeah.
even though I wasn't intentionally listening to King Crimson. It's probably some sort of osmosis.
And I may have I'm misremembering this. I feel like I know that Steve Albini recorded at least one of the Shorty records. I
Yeah.
think you did US Maple do a split with Shellac? Or have I
No. Well, the AC/DC single was a split with Breeze Glass, Shellac, Bigot, and
right,
US People.
right, okay. So did you work directly with Steve Albini at any point?
Well, a band I was in college in 1990 called E recorded at his house when he had a little Otari 8-track in the pantry of his kitchen. and some realistic PZM mics on the basement floor for the drums. Recording still kind of blows my mind how good the recording is. And then the Mercury Players did an ill-fated recording at his house when he had upgraded to the 24 track that I don't think anyone's uploaded anywhere yet. Maybe someone has. And other than that, no, US Maple never recorded with Steve directly.
And I was kind of wondering that, you know, one of the things that's sort of closely associated with Steve Albini was his love of analog recording techniques. And thinking about your move into recording and producing and mastering, I was wondering if that was also a big thing for you.
It's no, it's not. That would be nice, but those that ship has sailed, and just the amount of expense and uh, engineering know-how to keep machines like that running is just that's not for me. I love working with analog, but yeah, it's not cost effective. So yeah, I've learned to love the digital.
And how did you get into the recording side of things? When did you first have a sense that you wanted to do that?
Uh, Geez, when I was in high school, a friend of mine went halvesies on a cassette Porta One Tascam 4 track, and I don't know, that's the biggest thing that ever happened to me in recording is just having this cassette 4 track. Like that was a whole universe opening up to me. Then I don't know, I got one of those like Roland 1680 hard disk recorders, but I'd recorded in ADAT studios and little 8 track studios here and there. But it's kind of the necessity and just wanting to be able to make music on my own terms and not having a giant budget. If if there was a recording budget for a record at some point, I was just gonna funnel that into recording gear and software to just do it myself. It just made a lot more sense.
And
And same thing happened with mastering, whereas mastering's pretty expensive. And yeah, I just felt like I wanted to see what kind of results I could achieve. I'm that way with everything though. Like I look back at old press photos that US Maple did that, some great photographer took, and I'm just like, I wish I would have been framing that picture. Or it's, this video that Mark Fisher's gonna re-release, which I love the video, but just being involved in all that just made me want to do it.
mm.
Like I want to be in control all the time.
And so at what point did you decide that you were going to record and produce and do this side of things for other bands, not connected to music that you were making yourself?
Well, it was kind of just the means to the end to do my own music, but it just kind of evolved pretty naturally. People asking me, and then realizing I can parlay that into a little side hustle and diversify my income streams.
And we sort of like touched on
Welcome to
this.
the 21st century.
Yeah. We touched on this at the very beginning of the interview, but something I'm really curious to talk with people about in the sort of independent underground music world is that how much you can actually get by with music related activities. So if you think through your time making music, how much has that sort of fluctuated in terms of how much you've needed to have something outside of music to support you financially?
I've always had other jobs that were not music related. I have friends that can do it all with music, even though I have the handful of friends that have actually achieved some kind of escape velocity with their own music. And that's it's astonishing to me, and I'm so happy for those people, and I hope they can keep riding that wave. That's so cool. Um, Everybody else I know seems to kind of come in and out of kind of gig jobs,
Mm.
entry level jobs, and you might do lessons, or like me, you might do some mixing and mastering. You might do some studio work or being in someone's live band. There's a lot of that going on. But it's just an ever steepening climb, I think, as we move forward in time to depend on music to survive.
Do you think that you would want to be totally sustained by music, or do you think that that would then bring a certain kind of pressure that would impact on sort of creative freedom?
Oh, Thomas, I'm ready. I'm ready to survive, make music. Yeah, I, as long as it wasn't less than I have now, I'm all for it. Yeah, no, I'm not worried that that would compromise my artistic integrity.
Do you think that there is a way that, because I feel like with certain things, like let's say, for example, taking Spotify, that we have this age now where the streaming music, a lot of people are digesting their music through Spotify. And it almost feels to me sometimes that there's kind of like I don't know, a parallel with capitalism in general, that we go, oh, well, this is the thing, this is the system, there's nothing that can be done about it. Is there a sort of an imaginable way that we wouldn't necessarily have to have this kind of environment where such a small percentage of the money being made through things like Spotify, just as an example, gets funneled away from the artists? Is there a way in which that we can kind of move things in a different direction?
I don't have any ideas off the top of my head for you on that, unfortunately. It does seem like we've gone down this timeline, and there's plenty wrong with it. And yeah, I don't. It's hard for me to see the parallel reality where we don't just end up right here. It's a mixed bag though too. Like with digital music, I am able to have my dream studio for, a few $1,000s expense that I can make records that sound like $1 million was spent in 1995. Yeah, it's incredible what can be done with the technology on a using it to make art kind of level. And it's a hefty trade-off to not have any kind of commerce for the product that's made with those tools. But I'm okay with that. I'm trying to be philosophical about making music, moving on, and just trying to integrate making art into anything I do as much as possible.
And what are you actively doing at the moment? Like, I mean, are Dead Rider still an active concern?
Yeah, we've got a lot of stuff in the can. We turned taking a break from touring. Like we toured up until the beginning of 2019, and then wanted to just let's just park it for a minute and like do life for a little while. And then there was that whole lockdown thing. And then at some point, we were able to just go into the studio and start screwing around. And we've just kind of been in that mode for a while. Two of us are parents, and two of us have mortgages, and it's just there's a lot of other life struggles that are they don't really pair well with going on tour for weeks at a time. So we do shows once or twice a year, and we're looking forward to putting out a new album and getting back into flight condition.
And what about on the, well, I mean, do you have any other musical projects or everything that you do is funneled into Dead Rider at the moment?
There's nothing I want to talk about right now that I'm doing personally, but I've been involved in making a whole bunch of records, sort of mixing and recording and producing, and that's been great.
It's funny, like your name has been popping up I mean, I suppose the thing is, I end up sort of in little, well, maybe it's not even just end up in little circles. Like you brought up Sonic Youth early on, and that was kind of like for me, actually, Sonic Youth was, I think, my introduction into the more unusual realms of rock music, and a lot of stuff came out of that. So I think I have a tendency to gravitate towards this more sort of unusual rock music. And it's like I interviewed Tommy Meehan of Squid Pisser, and I think you've worked with Squid
Oh
Pisser.
yeah,
And then
yeah.
I interviewed Gregory Jacobson of Lovely Little Girls, and I'm actually going to interview Charlie Werber next
Oh,
week.
cool. Oh my God, his record is one of, I mean, when I say I was involved in that record, the guy who mixed it did such a great job. I hardly did anything. I
You're
just
talking
breathed
about the do you mean the first one, the
out.
Cleaning Filth from a Delicate Frame?
No, I mean Charlie's new record.
Ah, Charlie's new record. Yeah, yeah, it's great.
Yeah, the Lovely Little Girls record was the first one I did was recorded in my basement, and the second one I did was recorded at our studio, which is something between a private studio and a public facility.
And at that stage, like, going back to what you were saying before about the early experiences with US Maple, like when you're recording Lovely Little Girls or other bands, do you find yourself in situations where the band's coming and going, okay, we're going to do this in like 3 or 4 days? Does that tend to still be kind of the model?
No, no, it doesn't. Most of the things I work on are much more elaborate productions that are like setting up and doing basic tracks for a few days, and then the artist usually works on overdubs on and off. Might do overdubs at their house, might do other production type stuff at their house, and then we'll come back and mix sort of a la carte. Being a man who has a bunch of hustles going to survive, there aren't really big blocks of time that I can do unless there's a large chunk of money attached. I can do little chunks of money a la carte and keep it more budget friendly, but that's the side effect of that is I don't. Sometimes I wish things got wrapped up quicker, but I kind of wonder if anybody's doing that anymore. I suppose bands that go record on analog tape at Electrical probably still do something like that, where they might do a week or two with just one small break in between
Yeah.
tracking and
One thing just to go back to circle back to long hair. Were you directly involved in this reissue that's coming out with the colored vinyl version?
it's been a while coming. I wonder if I remastered it. I might have mastered it. I might
I
have
wa-
remastered it. If
I
not, I'm pretty sure that the bonus track with the it's called I Found a Place to Have My Kittens
mhm.
was originally on the vinyl only. Well, I guess it's still on the vinyl. I don't know if he's doing a compact disc, probably not. Um, but that one was mixed by Phil Bonet after the whole record was mixed. It was just kind of like another track that was unfinished, and we decided to hurry up and finish it and stick it on as a bonus track. And it ended up sounding, I love the way it sounds, but it sounds different than the mixes Jim had done. And it also didn't have the same, just sort of like sonic footprint on it. So I think I massaged that one a little bit.
Yeah, I was wondering because I didn't see any reference to it being remastered. And I'm never really 100% sure, like when things get reissued, what is a reissue versus a remaster? Like what are the different parameters that might be involved when something is said to have been remastered?
Well, that's a good question, and if you're a vinyl collector, you should definitely wonder like, is someone just getting the CD and running it through some plugins, or is someone digging out the archival master two-track tape and baking it and doing a fresh transfer and then running a whole fresh master from that unmastered source? There's a lot of both of those, but. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
that's something to wonder about for sure.
I wonder about that a fair bit with Killing Joke because I'm kind of obsessed with Killing Joke and I have
Hmm.
like almost every album on vinyl. And a lot of the stuff, I think the way it was recorded, first of all, didn't necessarily translate to exactly how they want it. So then I get these remastered versions. And initially, when I first heard pretty much all these albums, I heard them on CD. And now I've ended up getting vinyl versions. There's a lot of time where I'm listening to them, just like, is this really different? Or am I just telling myself it's different because I want it to be different?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I can't help you.
That is entirely fair enough.
I have a question for you though, because
Mm.
I feel like the second self-titled Killing Joke album featuring Dave Grohl on drums is one of those albums that like the heads will tell you just get their early stuff, but it's like no, that record's fantastic. And was that ever released on vinyl?
Yes, I have it.
Oh, it is. Okay.
But that's
And
one of these ones where
remastered?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Is it claimed to be remastered?
Exactly. And that's one where I'm still trying to figure out whether there's a difference between the vinyl version and the CD version. Because one of the things I think with Killing Joke, I love every era of Killing Joke. I don't think they have a bad album as such. They've got ones that I like less, but I do think that I would say, fell into the trap of that whole kind of the loudness wars thing. A lot of their later albums and with the remasters, they tend to be very kind of, I don't want to say totally brick walled, but they're more in that sort of direction. And I think that was a bit of a thing with the second self-titled Killing Joke album. Is it's like there's just high sound the whole way through. There's not a lot of dynamics. I mean, I don't know if you have
Still
any
sounds really
particularly.
good though.
It does still sound really good. That is true. I mean, do you have any kind of strong feelings about that kind of that trend?
I like it if it sounds good.
I think that's a good attitude to have.
Yeah, no, I'm not a
You're not a purist.
fundamentalist.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's definitely something to be said for rendering things in a way that uh, especially if you're into hi-fi, if you have thousands of watts of tube power driving your amazing speakers and you know you want that full dynamic range. It really is going to tear your head off. It's going to be great. You're going to be that guy in that old Maxell ad. And there's also something to, hey, this music is meant to be enjoyed in a club at top volume, and it's got to be loud. It's got to just make everybody in the room ill with how loud it is. That's what it's for.
Yeah.
Killing Joke, I think, like, I wonder. I sort of feel like they are the loudness wars.
They're definitely something.
Yeah,
Or they were,
yeah. Poor Geordie.
indeed.
Did he really play through that hollow body guitar with all that gain? How? How do you do it? I think that's a trick.
I think he is genuinely my favorite guitarist. There's just a
Yeah.
completely a sound that cannot be replicated by anyone.
No, that he had his own sound for sure, and just the most impossible combination of gear too. If you're a gearhead on guitar, it's just like, what? No. That
Yep.
can't possibly work. I think that's some like Billy Gibbons. I'm just trying to trick everyone who's trying to sound like me.
Yeah, good old Billy Gibbons. I remember there was this is very incidental, and I will let you go in a minute. There was I've forgotten what it's called, Guitar Moves. I've forgotten the name of the guy that does that, but he gets different guitarists to guest with him.
Yeah.
And he did one with
Sweeney.
Sweeney, that's it. And he did one with
Yeah,
Josh Homme. I never know actually whether to say Josh Homme or Josh Homme.
me neither.
Oh well, one of the two perhaps. He's doing an episode with him, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I worked with Billy Gibbons, and I hope he's not going to mind me giving this away." But Billy Gibbons has got this thing that sounds like a hammer-on, and he couldn't. I'm not going to describe it very well, but it's going something like that, and he couldn't
Uh,
figure out what it was, and it ended up being like a very not what you would expect. Like he was basically just bending the string and then doing a kind of a hammer-on thing, and Josh Homme was like, "That's it, that's your thing." Like,
I
and
know
he's like,
what you're talking about. I use that all the time. It's yeah, I learned that from the internet and I had the same reaction of, oh, that's so easy. And now I have to like will myself to not do it all the time because it's just it's too great. It's one of those, it's like learning an ollie or something. Like now you're just ollieing all over town on your skateboard. Like just cut it, just ride. Come on, man.
"Indeed, don't turn it into too much of a recognizable gimmick."
Look at me, I can ollie.
Todd, it was a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. I'm very happy that you made the time. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Let's do it again sometime when I have something new to offer the world.
I would love to, 100%. Cheers, Todd. All
See
the
you next
best.
time.